8-year-old Scarlett had made a promise at her grandmother's funeral. She would sing her favorite song on a big stage one day. But her grandmother was gone now, and Scarlett's heart was so broken that she couldn't even make a sound. The vibrant little girl, who once filled every room with her melodious voice, had become as silent as the grave that now held her most beloved companion. Scarlett's grandmother, Eleanor, had been more than just a family member. She had been Scarlett's best friend, mentor, and musical inspiration all rolled into one. Every afternoon after school, Scarlett would run to her grandmother's cozy house, where the smell of fresh cookies and the sound of old records playing on the vintage turntable created a magical world just for the two of them. Eleanor had been a singer herself in her youth, performing in small clubs and local theaters before marriage, and motherhood redirected her path. It was Eleanor who had first noticed Scarlett's exceptional voice when the little girl was just 4 years old, humming along to the radio with perfect pitch and an instinctive understanding of melody. From that moment on, Eleanor had dedicated herself to nurturing her granddaughter's gift, teaching her not just how to sing, but how to feel music in her soul and express emotions through her voice that words alone could never convey. The two of them had spent countless hours together, with Eleanor sharing stories of the great singers she had admired, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, and yes, Elvis Presley. She would tell Scarlett about the power of music to heal broken hearts, to bring people together, and to create moments of pure magic that could transcend ordinary life. Music, Eleanor would say, is the language the soul speaks when words aren't enough. Their favorite ritual was their evening concerts in Eleanor's living room. Eleanor would play piano while Scarlett sang, both of them lost in their own little world of harmony and joy. Neighbors would sometimes stop their evening walks just to listen to the beautiful sounds drifting from the windows, and more than once, people had knocked on the door to compliment the professional singer they assumed must live there. But what Scarlett didn't know was that the magical moment at the Elvis concert would break her silence, move 25,000 people to tears, and give her the chance to keep her promise to her grandmother in the most extraordinary way imaginable. 3 months ago, everything changed in the span of a single phone call. Eleanor had suffered a massive heart attack while tending to her garden, the place where she had taught Scarlett the names of every flower and the songs that birds sang to greet each morning. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone, leaving behind a devastated family and one inconsolable 8-year-old girl whose world had just collapsed completely. Scarlett's parents, David and Michelle, watched helplessly as their once joyful daughter retreated into a shell of silence and grief. The house that had once echoed with Scarlett's practicing scales and spontaneous songs became eerily quiet. The piano sat untouched, gathering dust like a monument to happier times. Scarlett's music books remained closed on her shelf, and her toy microphone, a gift from Eleanor for her 7th birthday, lay forgotten in a corner. At the funeral, Scarlett had stood beside the casket wearing her best dress, the navy blue one with tiny white flowers that Eleanor had helped her pick out for the school choir concert. As people shared memories of Eleanor's life, Scarlett remained silent, clutching a single red rose and fighting back tears that seemed too big for her small body to contain. When it was time for people to say their final goodbyes, Scarlett approached the casket alone. She leaned close to her grandmother's peaceful face and whispered words that only she and Eleanor could hear. "Grandmama, I promise I'll sing your favorite song on a big stage someday, and you'll be there with me. I promise." That promise had seemed achievable when Eleanor was alive to encourage and guide her. But now, with her grandmother gone, and her voice seemingly buried with her, Scarlett couldn't imagine how she would ever fulfill such an impossible vow. The very thought of singing made her throat close up and her eyes fill with tears. How could she sing when the person who had taught her the meaning of music was was no longer there to hear it. In the weeks following the funeral, Scarlett's parents tried everything they could think of to help their daughter heal. They took her to her favorite places, bought her new toys, and even suggested getting a puppy. But nothing seemed to reach the place where Scarlett had locked away her voice along with her grief. She went through the motions of daily life, eating, sleeping, going to school, but it was as if the light inside her had been extinguished. Michelle had always been an Elvis fan, just like her mother-in-law Eleanor had been. She remembered how Eleanor's eyes would light up whenever an Elvis song came on the radio, and how she would tell stories about seeing him perform on television in the 1950s when she was just a teenager herself. Eleanor had often said that Elvis had a special gift for making people feel less alone in the world, that his voice could reach into the darkest corners of the human heart and bring light. When Michelle saw the advertisement for Elvis's upcoming concert in Las Vegas, something stirred inside her, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, music might be the key to reaching her daughter. She remembered how Scarlett and Eleanor used to dance around the living room to "Can't Help Falling in Love," both of them laughing and spinning until they collapsed in giggles on the couch. "David," she said to her husband one evening after Scarlett had gone to bed, "I want to take Scarlett to see Elvis." David looked up from his newspaper with surprise. "Honey, she won't even listen to music anymore. How do you think she'll react to a concert?" "I don't know," Michelle admitted, "but I keep thinking about what Mom always said, that music could heal anything. Maybe if Scarlett hears Elvis sing the way Grandmama used to talk about, maybe it will remind her that there's still beauty in the world." The tickets were expensive, more than they could really afford, but David could see the hope in his wife's eyes, the first real hope either of them had felt since Eleanor's death. They decided to take the risk, to make this one desperate attempt to reach their daughter through the music that had once brought her so much joy. When they told Scarlett about the concert, her reaction was barely perceptible. She looked at them with those big brown eyes that had lost their sparkle, nodded once, and returned to staring out her bedroom window. She didn't ask questions, didn't show excitement or resistance, just the same heartbreaking acceptance that had characterized her response to everything since her grandmother's death. The drive to Las Vegas was mostly silent, with Scarlett sitting in the back seat, clutching a small photo of her and Eleanor taken just weeks before her grandmother's death. In the picture, both of them were smiling broadly, Eleanor's arms wrapped around Scarlett as they sat at the piano bench together. It was one of the last photos taken of them together, and Scarlett carried it everywhere now as if it were a talisman that could somehow bring her grandmother back. Michelle kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hoping to see some sign of interest or excitement from her daughter, but Scarlett remained as quiet and withdrawn as she had been for months. She wore a simple white dress with small purple flowers, Eleanor's favorite colors, and her long brown hair was pulled back in the braids that her grandmother used to make for her every morning. As they entered the outskirts of Las Vegas, the city's bright lights and bustling energy created a stark contrast to the subdued atmosphere inside their car. David tried to engage Scarlett by pointing out interesting sights and landmarks, but she seemed to look right through everything, lost in her own world of grief and memory. "Remember how Grandmama used to talk about Las Vegas?" Michelle asked gently. "She always said it was a magical place where dreams could come true." Scarlett's fingers tightened around the photograph, but she didn't respond. Michelle felt her heart break a little more, wondering if they had made a mistake in bringing their grieving daughter to such an overwhelming place. But something deep inside her insisted that this was right, that Eleanor herself would have wanted them to take this chance. The hotel where they were staying was modest but comfortable, and from their room window, they could see the lights of the Strip twinkling in the distance. As they prepared for the concert, Michelle helped Scarlett get dressed, gently brushing her hair and trying to coax a smile from her daughter's solemn face. "Grandmama would be so proud to see you looking so beautiful," Michelle whispered, but Scarlett only nodded and clutched her grandmother's photo tighter. The International Hotel's showroom was massive, with a capacity that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. As they they found their seats in the middle section, Scarlett looked around with wide eyes at the thousands of people filing in around them. The energy in the room was electric, with fans of all ages talking excitedly about the performance they were about to witness. Michelle had specifically chosen seats where they would have a clear view of the stage but wouldn't be overwhelmed by the crowd. She wanted Scarlett to feel safe and comfortable, hoping that being surrounded by so many people who shared a love of music might somehow help her daughter remember her own connection to that world. The people around them were a diverse group: families with children, elderly couples who had been Elvis fans since the beginning of his career, young adults discovering his music for the first time, and tourists who had come to Las Vegas specifically for this show. Everyone seemed united by anticipation and shared excitement, creating an atmosphere of community and joy that filled the vast space. Scarlett sat quietly between her parents, still holding the photograph and observing everything with the same detached interest she had shown toward everything else in recent months. Michelle noticed how small and fragile her daughter looked, surrounded by all these animated, happy people, and her heart ached with the hope that somehow this evening might reach the part of Scarlett that had been hiding since Eleanor's death. A family with 2 young children sat in the row in front of them, and Michelle watched as the children chattered excitedly about seeing Elvis. The little girl, who appeared to be about Scarlett's age, was wearing a miniature version of one of Elvis's famous jumpsuits, complete with sequins and a cape. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Michelle found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. "Look, sweetheart," Michelle said softly to Scarlett. "That little girl is so excited to see Elvis. I bet she's been looking forward to this for a long time." Scarlett glanced at the other child briefly, but there was no recognition in her eyes, no spark of connection or shared excitement. She simply looked away and returned her attention to the photograph in her hands, as if the other child existed in a different world entirely. When the lights dimmed and the crowd's anticipation reached a fever pitch, even Scarlett seemed to take notice. The roar of 25,000 people was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a wall of sound that seemed to vibrate through the floor and into her bones. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, as if the sheer magnitude of collective human emotion had managed to penetrate her protective shell. Then Elvis appeared, and the entire venue erupted into pure pandemonium. He wore his iconic white jumpsuit with elaborate gold and crystal beading that caught the stage lights like captured fire. His presence was overwhelming, commanding, charismatic, and somehow larger than life even in a venue filled with thousands of people. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral, with people jumping to their feet, screaming, and reaching toward the stage as if they could somehow touch their idol. "Good evening, Las Vegas," Elvis called out, his voice carrying easily over the sound system and somehow reaching every corner of the massive venue. His smile was genuine and warm, and even from their seats in the middle section, Michelle could see why people were so drawn to him. There was something about his presence that made each person in the audience feel like he was performing just for them. Elvis launched into his opening number, and the band behind him created a wall of sound that was both powerful and nuanced. The backup singers, dressed in flowing gowns that moved with the music, provided perfect harmonies, while Elvis commanded the stage with movements that seemed both rehearsed and spontaneous. The lighting design was spectacular, with colors shifting and changing to match the mood of each song, creating an almost cinematic experience. Michelle found herself getting caught up in the performance despite her concerns about Scarlett. She had forgotten how much she enjoyed Elvis's music, how his voice could transport her to a different emotional space. For a few minutes, she allowed herself to remember happier times, dancing to Elvis songs at her wedding, listening to his records with Eleanor while they cooked Sunday dinner, watching Scarlett and her grandmother perform their own versions of his hits in the living room. But when she looked at Scarlett, her heart sank. Her daughter remained completely unmoved by the spectacle unfolding before them, while 24,999 other people were on their feet, singing along and swaying to the music. Scarlett sat perfectly still, staring at the stage with eyes that seemed to see nothing at all. Elvis was midway through true hound dog when something made him pause and scan the audience more carefully than usual. He had performed this routine thousands of times, but tonight something felt different. His eyes moved across the crowd, taking in the faces of his devoted fans, when suddenly his gaze stopped on a small figure in the middle section. Elvis had developed an almost supernatural ability to read crowds during his years of performing. He could sense when someone in the audience was struggling, when they needed something more than just entertainment. But when his eyes found Scarlett, he felt something that took his breath away, a profound sadness that seemed to radiate from this small child like a physical presence. While everyone around her was caught up in the joy and excitement of the performance, Scarlett sat motionless, looking like a statue carved from sorrow. Her stillness was so complete, so absolute, that it stood out dramatically against the animated crowd surrounding her. Elvis could see that she was holding something in her hands, something she was gripping tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. Without breaking his performance, Elvis continued singing, but kept part of his attention focused on this mysterious child. He had seen sad fans before, people dealing with personal struggles who came to his concerts seeking escape or comfort. But there was something different about this little girl, something that spoke to a deeper kind of pain than the usual heartbreak or disappointment that brought people to his shows. As he moved into the next verse, Elvis found himself repositioning on stage to get a better view of the child. From this new angle, he could see more clearly the way she held herself, not just sad, but somehow absent, as if part of her spirit had departed from her small body. The woman sitting next to her, presumably her mother, was watching the performance with obvious enjoyment, but Elvis could see the way she kept glancing at her daughter with worry and hope in her eyes. The contrast was heartbreaking. A mother trying desperately to find something, anything, that might reach her child, and a child who seemed to have retreated so far into herself that she might never find her way back. Elvis had experienced his own share of loss and grief, and he recognized the particular kind of pain that children experience when they lose someone they love deeply. The song came to its natural end, and instead of immediately launching into the next number, Elvis walked to the edge of the stage closest to where Scarlett was sitting. He could see more clearly now the photograph she was clutching, the way her parents were watching her with such desperate hope, and most tellingly, the expression of someone who had lost something precious and couldn't figure out how to continue living without it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice taking on a different quality, softer, more intimate, despite the microphone amplification. "Before we continue tonight, I want to share something with all of you. Music has the power to heal broken hearts, to connect us with those we've lost, and to remind us that love never really dies." The audience listened with rapt attention. Many Elvis fans had attended multiple concerts, but they had never heard him speak so personally, so directly about the deeper meaning behind his music. There was something in his voice that suggested this wasn't part of his usual performance routine, but rather something spontaneous and deeply felt. "Sometimes," Elvis continued, "when you're looking out at a crowd of thousands of people, one person captures your attention. And tonight, I see a beautiful little girl who looks like she might be carrying something very heavy in her heart." Michelle felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized Elvis was talking about Scarlett. Around them, people began looking in their direction, trying to identify the child Elvis was referring to. But Scarlett remained motionless, seemingly unaware that she had become the focus of 25,000 pairs of eyes. "Honey," Elvis said, his voice now directed specifically towards Scarlett, "little lady with the pretty white dress, I can see you're holding something special in your hands. Would you like to tell me about it?" The spotlight operator, following Elvis's gesture, found Scarlett in the crowd, and suddenly she was bathed in warm, golden light. For the first time since entering the venue, Scarlett moved slightly, blinking in the unexpected brightness and looking around with confusion rather than her usual vacant stare. "It's okay, sweetheart," Elvis encouraged, his voice filled with gentle warmth. "I just noticed that you seem sad, and I wondered if maybe you'd like to share what's making your heart heavy tonight." Michelle leaned down to whisper in Scarlett's ear, "Sweetheart, Elvis is talking to you. Do you want to tell him about Grandmama?" For the first time in months, Scarlett looked directly at her mother with with something approaching recognition. The mention of her grandmother's name seemed to spark something inside her, a flicker of the connection that had once defined their relationship. "It's okay, baby," Michelle continued gently. "You can talk to him if you want to. I think he really wants to help." Scarlett looked toward the stage where Elvis stood, waiting patiently, his expression kind and understanding. Even from their seats, she could see something in his eyes that reminded her of her grandmother, a warmth that made her feel safe, a patience that didn't demand anything from her except what she was willing to give. Slowly, carefully, Scarlett stood up in her seat. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper, but the sensitive stage microphones picked up every word and carried it to every corner of the venue. "This is my grandmama," she said, holding up the photograph so Elvis could see it. "She died, and I promised her I would sing her favorite song on a big stage, but I can't sing anymore because she's not here to hear it." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if they had been locked inside her for months and finally found a way to escape. The audience heard every syllable, and a collective intake of breath swept through the venue. People throughout the auditorium felt their hearts clench with sympathy and understanding as this small child's grief was laid bare before them. Elvis felt tears spring to his eyes as he looked at the photograph Scarlett was holding up, a picture of a little girl and an elderly woman, both smiling broadly, obviously sharing a moment of pure joy and love. He could see immediately what this child had lost, and his heart broke for the enormity of her grief. "What was your grandmama's favorite song, sweetheart?" Elvis asked gently, his voice thick with emotion. "Love Me Tender," Scarlett replied, her voice growing slightly stronger. "She used to sing it to me every night before bed, and she taught me all the words, but I can't sing it without her." "You know what I think?" Elvis said, kneeling down at the edge of the stage to bring himself closer to Scarlett's level. "I think your grandmama's still with you, right here." He placed his hand over his heart. "And I think she would love nothing more than to hear you sing her favorite song on this big stage tonight." Scarlett shook her head, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "I can't. My voice won't work without her." "Well," Elvis said with a gentle smile, "what if I helped you? What if we sang it together? And I'll be right there with you the whole time. Sometimes when we're sad, it helps to have someone sing alongside us until we remember how to find our own voice again." The invitation hung in the air like a bridge between Scarlett's world of grief and a possibility she had never imagined. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath, 25,000 people, collectively hoping that this small, sad child would find the courage to accept this extraordinary gift. Scarlett looked at the photograph in her hands, studying her grandmother's smiling face as if seeking permission or guidance. In that moment, she could almost hear Eleanor's voice whispering the words she had said so many times. "Music is the language the soul speaks when words aren't enough, darling. And our souls never really say goodbye. Would you like to come up here with me?" Elvis asked gently. "I promise I'll take good care of you, and your mama and daddy can come too if that would make you feel safer." Scarlett looked back at her parents, who were both crying now, overwhelmed by the generosity of this stranger and the hope that their daughter might finally find a way to honor her grandmother's memory. David nodded encouragingly while Michelle squeezed Scarlett's hand. "Grandmama always said dreams could come true in Las Vegas," Scarlett whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Then, louder, "Okay, I'll try." As Scarlett and her parents made their way down the aisle toward the stage, the audience began to applaud. But this wasn't the wild, enthusiastic applause typical of an Elvis concert. Instead, it was something softer, more reverent, the kind of applause that says, "We believe in you," and "You're not alone." The sound seemed to give Scarlett strength, and her steps became more confident as she approached the stage. Security personnel and venue staff appeared to help guide them through the crowd, but they did so with unusual gentleness, clearly understanding that this was a sacred moment requiring special care. Other audience members reached out to touch Scarlett's shoulder gently or whisper words of encouragement as she passed, creating a corridor of support and love. Elvis remained at the edge of the stage throughout their journey, his attention completely focused on Scarlett. He had temporarily forgotten that he was performing for 25,000 people. In that moment, his entire world had narrowed to this small child who was walking toward him with such courage despite her obvious pain. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Elvis called out as Scarlett approached the stage. "Take your time. There's no hurry at all." When they reached the stage, several staff members helped Scarlett up the steps, while her parents were guided to a special area where they could watch from close by. Scarlett's legs were trembling slightly, and her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. But she kept walking, kept moving forward, driven by something that felt like her grandmother's presence urging her on. Elvis knelt down to Scarlett's level as she reached the center of the stage, bringing himself to her eye level so she wouldn't be intimidated by his height or the overwhelming nature of performing in front of such a massive audience. "Hi there, beautiful," Elvis said softly, his voice now gentle and conversational rather than performative. "I'm so glad you decided to come up here. Your grandmama must have been a very special lady to have raised such a brave granddaughter." Scarlett looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine whether this stranger could be trusted with her most precious memories. What she saw there was genuine kindness, infinite patience, and something that reminded her so strongly of her grandmother that it took her breath away. "She was the best person in the whole world," Scarlett whispered. "She taught me everything about music and singing, and how to feel the songs in your heart." "I can tell," Elvis replied, "and I bet she's watching right now, so proud of how brave you're being. Are you ready to sing her favorite song?" Elvis stood and addressed the audience, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my new friend Scarlett. She's going to help me sing Love Me Tender tonight, and she's going to dedicate it to her grandmama who taught her that music never really dies." The audience erupted in warm, supportive applause as Elvis signaled to his band. The opening notes of Love Me Tender began to play, gentle and soft, creating a tender atmosphere that seemed to wrap around Scarlett like a comforting embrace. Elvis began to sing, his voice taking on an even more tender quality than usual. He sang the first verse alone, giving Scarlett time to find her courage and remember the words that her grandmother had sung to her so many times. As he sang, he kept one gentle hand on Scarlett's shoulder, letting her know that she wasn't alone up there. When the second verse began, Elvis looked down at Scarlett encouragingly. "Your turn, sweetheart. Your grandmama's favorite part." For a moment, Scarlett's throat felt closed, her voice trapped by months of grief and silence. But then she looked out at the audience. 25,000 people all focused on her with love and support, and she felt something shift inside her chest. It was as if her grandmother's spirit was there with her, giving her the strength and courage she needed. Scarlett's voice emerged softly at first, tentative and fragile like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. But as she continued, her voice grew stronger, more confident, filled with all the love and longing she had been carrying for her grandmother. The words flowed from her heart rather than her memory, each note carrying the weight of her promise and the depth of her love. Elvis continued to sing harmony, his powerful voice supporting and encouraging Scarlett's delicate one. Together, they created something magical, not just a performance, but a moment of healing, a celebration of love that transcends death, and a tribute to the bonds that connect us across the divide between life and whatever comes after. As Scarlett's voice filled the auditorium, something extraordinary happened. The audience, which had started the evening expecting to be entertained, found themselves witnessing something much more profound. This wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a ceremony of healing, a demonstration of love's power to overcome grief, and a reminder that music really could work miracles. People throughout the venue were crying openly, not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition and wonder. They were witnessing the moment when a broken heart began to heal, when a silenced voice found its strength again, and when a promise made in grief was fulfilled in love. Grown men who had come to hear rock and roll found themselves moved by the pure emotion of a child honoring her grandmother's memory. In the crowd, parents held their own children closer, grateful for what they had and deeply moved by what this family had lost and found again. Elderly audience members thought of their own grandchildren and the precious bonds that connect generations. Young people in the audience began to understand, perhaps for the first time, the profound importance of family connections and the devastating impact of loss. Michelle and David watched from the side of the stage, tears streaming down their faces as they heard their daughter's voice again for the first time in months. But these weren't the broken sobs they had grown accustomed to. This was Scarlett's true voice, clear and strong and filled with love rather than pain. As the song continued, something beautiful began to happen. Other audience members started singing along softly, their voices joining Scarlett's and Elvis's in a harmony that seemed to encompass the entire venue. It wasn't planned or orchestrated. It was simply 25,000 people instinctively recognizing a sacred moment and wanting to be part of it. The backup singers, moved by what they were witnessing, added their voices to the growing chorus. The band played with extra tenderness, understanding that they were providing the soundtrack to something unprecedented. Even the venue staff, busy with their usual duties, stopped to listen and wipe away unexpected tears. As the final notes of Love Me Tender faded away, the auditorium fell into complete silence. For a moment that seemed to last forever, no one moved or spoke. Scarlett stood on the stage beside Elvis, her face wet with tears, but glowing with something that had been missing for months: peace. Then the applause began, and it was unlike anything anyone in that venue had ever heard. It started as a rumble, like distant thunder, and built to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. But this wasn't just appreciation for a performance. It was celebration of healing, recognition of courage, and gratitude for being allowed to witness something truly miraculous. Elvis knelt down beside Scarlett again, speaking to her in a voice that the audience couldn't quite hear through the applause but could see was gentle and loving. He was telling her that her grandmother would be so proud, that she had honored her memory beautifully, and that her voice was a gift that should never be hidden away again. "Thank you," Scarlett whispered to Elvis, her voice now clear and strong. "I could feel her with me when we were singing. I could feel Grandmama right here." She placed her small hand over her heart, mirroring the gesture Elvis had made earlier. "She never left, sweetheart," Elvis replied. "She's been there all along, waiting for you to be ready to feel her love again. And now you know, whenever you sing, whenever you make music, she's right there with you." Elvis stood and faced the audience, his arm protectively around Scarlett's shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "Scarlett has just reminded us all that love never really dies, that music has the power to heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most beautiful performances come from the heart rather than the stage." The audience rose to their feet in another thunderous ovation as Elvis walked Scarlett to the edge of the stage where her parents were waiting. As he handed her down to them, the love and gratitude in their eyes said everything that words couldn't express. When Scarlett was safely back in her parents' arms, Elvis returned to his microphone to address the audience one final time before continuing his concert. "What we just witnessed here tonight," he said, "reminds us why music exists. It's not just entertainment, it's healing, it's connection, it's love made audible. Scarlett and her grandmama have given us all a gift tonight." As Elvis prepared to continue his show, something remarkable happened throughout the audience. People were approaching the Wells family, not to gawk or intrude, but to share their own stories of loss and healing. An elderly woman explained how she had lost her husband the previous year and had almost given up on finding joy again, until watching Scarlett's courage reminded her to keep trying. A young father told them about his own daughter, who had been struggling with selective mutism after a traumatic experience, and how watching Scarlett find her voice had given him hope that his child might do the same. A teenager shyly approached to say that seeing Scarlett's bravery had inspired her to audition for her school's choir, something she had been too afraid to try before. Elvis completed his concert with renewed energy and purpose, but everyone in the venue knew that the evening's most important moment had already occurred. Throughout the remaining songs, he would occasionally glance toward where Scarlett was sitting with her parents, smiling when he saw her swaying to the music or leaning against her mother with contentment rather than withdrawal. During his final song of the evening, Elvis dedicated it to all the grandmamas and grandpas who teach us about love, and all the grandchildren who keep their memory alive through courage and song. The audience understood immediately that he was honoring not just Scarlett and Eleanor, but all the bonds of love that connect us across generations and even across the divide of death. In the days and weeks following the concert, Scarlett's story spread far beyond Las Vegas. Local news stations picked up the story first, with headlines like "Elvis helps grieving child find her voice" and "The night music worked a miracle." But soon, national media outlets were covering the story, and it became a symbol of hope for families dealing with loss and trauma everywhere. Child psychologists began using Scarlett's breakthrough as an example of how healing can occur when children feel truly understood and supported in their grief. Music therapists incorporated the lessons from her experience into their practice, emphasizing the importance of honoring lost loved ones through creative expression rather than trying to move past grief as quickly as possible. Elvis himself was deeply moved by the response to that evening. In interviews, he spoke about how Scarlett had reminded him of the real purpose behind his music, not just to entertain, but to heal, to connect, and to bring light into dark places. "That little girl taught me more about the power of music in 5 minutes than I had learned in 20 years of performing," he said. Most importantly, Scarlett continued to heal and grow. The breakthrough she had experienced at the concert became the foundation for steady progress in her recovery. She began singing regularly again, first quietly in her room and then with increasing confidence in public. She joined her school choir and later auditioned for local community theater productions. But perhaps most significantly, Scarlett never forgot the lesson that Elvis and that magical evening had taught her, that love doesn't end with death, that the people we lose continue to live on in our hearts and in our actions, and that sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is to continue living, creating, and sharing the gifts they helped us discover. Years later, when Scarlett was in high school and had become an accomplished young singer, she would often perform "Love Me Tender" at concerts and recitals. Each time she would dedicate it to her grandmother Eleanor and tell the story of the night Elvis helped her find her voice again. Her performances of that song were always particularly moving, infused with the depth of experience and the understanding of loss that most teenagers couldn't possibly possess. The dress she wore that night, the white one with purple flowers, was carefully preserved and became a family heirloom, representing not the day of loss, but the beginning of healing. Scarlett would sometimes hold it when she needed to remember her grandmother's love or when she was preparing for important performances. The connection she had forged with Elvis that night also continued over the years. They exchanged letters and occasional phone calls, with Elvis always checking on her progress and encouraging her musical development. He would send her records of his new songs, and she would send him recordings of her school performances. Their friendship, born in a moment of crisis and compassion, became a lasting source of support and inspiration for both of them. The story of that evening became legendary not just in Las Vegas but among Elvis fans worldwide. It was frequently cited as an example of why Elvis was beloved not just for his musical talent but for his genuine humanity and compassion. The story inspired other performers to be more aware of their audiences and more willing to use their platforms for healing rather than just entertainment. For the 25,000 people who witnessed that evening, it became a touchstone moment that they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Many of them would later say that watching Scarlett's breakthrough had changed their own perspective on grief, healing, and the importance of supporting others in their darkest moments. The evening that began with a silent, grieving child ended with a demonstration of music's power to heal even the deepest wounds. Scarlett's courage to honor her grandmother's memory and Elvis's compassion in recognizing and responding to her pain created a moment that transcended entertainment and became something sacred. Scarlett learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting those we've lost, but rather learning to carry their love with us as we continue living. She discovered that the promises we make to those we love don't die with them, but rather become opportunities for growth, courage, and connection that can extend far beyond our own lives. The audience learned that the most powerful performances aren't
always the most technically perfect ones, but rather those that come from authentic human emotion and genuine need. They witnessed how a single act of compassion can create ripples of healing that extend far beyond the original moment, touching countless lives in ways that may never be fully measured. Elvis, at the height of his career and fame, demonstrated that true greatness lies not in talent or popularity, but in the willingness to recognize when someone needs help and the courage to offer it without reservation. In choosing to see and respond to one child's grief, he created a moment of healing that would inspire acts of kindness and compassion for generations to come.
The story of Elvis and Scarlett reminds us that in a world that can sometimes seem overwhelming and indifferent, there are still moments of pure grace waiting to unfold. Sometimes they come from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes they happen when we least expect them, but they are always there for those who have the courage to remain open to the possibility of healing, hope, and human connection. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those moments happen on a stage in Las Vegas with 25,000 people watching, as a promise made in grief is fulfilled in love.